Page 87. Royals and robber barons financed the West's dissection of sub-Saharan Africa, but it was Europe's working classes that did the empire's heavy lifting. Laborers, cast-offs, and soldiers returning from war came to Africa searching for a life better than they were offered at home. Today, the primary distinction between African nations is rooted in the difference in the European émigrés' state of mind when they stepped off the boat. In countries like Congo, Angola, Ghana, and Rwanda, colonialists arrived with no intent other than to plunder Africa's natural resources and exploit its labor before heading back home with their bounty. In countries like Zimbabwe, Kenya, and South Africa, the pattern was quite different. Whites in those countries were settlers who considered themselves Africans at least as much as Europeans. They came to stay, and on the backs of black labor built a country that their children and grandchildren could live in comfortably for generations to come. The European settlers who most identified with Africa were the Afrikaners, the Dutch émigrés and French Huguenots who fled religious persecution in their own countries and had headed south to the Cape of Good Hope beginning in 1652. Their strong ties to the land played an instrumental role in the development of the most industrialized country in sub-Saharan Africa, as central to the region as the United States is to the rest of the world. Like the ethoses of the American West and the Australian outback, in which brave, resourceful pioneers struck out on their own and conquered hostile lands and savage people, the Afrikaners, Africa's lost tribe, constructed a similar nationalist identity. God and capitalism's consecration of the individual and his private property got the white man through. Beginning in the 1830s, Afrikaners embarked on a series of mass migrations inland from South Africa's Western Cape region by the Atlantic Ocean in search of fertile farmland. The voortrekkers, literally those who move ahead to new lands to the north, encountered violent resistance from the Zulus, or the people of the sky, the indigenous warrior tribe that populates the mountainous coastal regions of KwaZulu-Natal. In 1857, Peter Retief, a wealthy Afrikaner farmer, led his delegation of covered wagons over the Drakensberg Mountains into KwaZulu-Natal, where he entered into negotiations with Dingaan, a chief who became king of the Zulus after he murdered his brother Shaka Zulu in 1828. In the popular Afrikaans version of the meeting, the two men signed a deed, historians agree that it was written in English, bequeathing lands to the voortrekkers of Retief. If Retief recovered some cattle stolen by a rival tribe. Retief's repatriation of the cattle was feted with 2 days of feasting by Dingaan and his chiefs, but the king turned on Retief and his party and killed them, and then sent his forces to massacre about 500 Afrikaner men, women, and children camped nearby. By and large, blacks tell a slightly different story. Dingaan's act was not an act of betrayal, but one of self-defense when it became clear that there had been a misunderstanding between the two men. Dingaan had intended for the voortrekkers to farm the land, but not to own it. An argument ensued. Retief threatened Dingaan with a musket. The idea of property rights was foreign to Africans. No one owned the land, not even Dingaan. The land belonged to everyone and was to be parceled out, leased, if you will, as the king, its caretaker, saw fit. In a communal agrarian culture that valued collaboration over competition, you could no more own the soil beneath your feet than you could own the sky or the sun or the water. The confrontation between Retief and Dingaan formed the template not just for apartheid, but for the enduring relationship between the tribes of the global North and South over private property and the public good. Thousands of British prospectors and settlers streamed into South Africa following the 1885 discovery of gold in the Transvaal region, which now includes Johannesburg, and which was colonized by the Afrikaners, pejoratively called Boers or farmers by the newcomers. The resulting dispute triggered two Boer Wars, the last of which culminated in a decisive British victory in 1902. The British burned to the ground thousands of Afrikaner homesteads and jailed thousands of women and children, both black and white, whose husbands and fathers had taken up arms against the Queen. A post-war study concluded that more than 25,000 Afrikaners, mostly women and children under 16, and more than 14,000 blacks died from starvation, disease, and exposure in British internment centers, for which the term concentration camp was coined. In the war's aftermath, Afrikaners were subject to British administrators and humiliated by their lowly status, forced to compete for sometimes menial jobs with blacks, and even to work shoulder to shoulder with them. When the Afrikaners Nationalist Party reclaimed control of the government in nationwide elections in 1948, the Afrikaners earned 60 cents for every dollar in British income. Africans earned only 30 cents. Within months of the 1948 election, the Nationalist Party had passed laws that were the foundation for apartheid, and a decade later, Afrikaners' income disparity with the British had been reversed. By 1956, the British in South Africa were earning 60 cents for every dollar in income pocketed by the Afrikaners, while incomes for blacks dropped to 20 cents on the dollar earned by the British. There is, however, a very real irony in apartheid. The Afrikaners essentially created their segregationist state with a promissory note to end poverty for their own, and they did it with the same ruthlessness that global financiers use to fatten their pockets in this global economy, but with strategies that are the exact opposite of those of the international trading regime. Using a formula for white South Africans similar to Perón's strategy for all Argentines, the Nationalist Party poured money into whites-only schools, whites-only hospitals, and whites-only banking institutions. They nationalized key industries, subsidized strategic sectors of the economy, and deployed the civil service as a Keynesian buffer against unemployment. With the land they seized from Africans, they created one of the best classes of commercial farmers in the world, providing first-time farmers with seeds, equipment, training, and loans. When inexperienced white farmers couldn't turn a profit their first time out, the government often forgave them their loan, gave them another, and told them to take another shot at it, on and on until they got it right. When voters repealed apartheid, the percentage of whites living in poverty in South Africa was exactly 0. By 2006, after a decade of policies designed to expand trade and create a more just economy, the figure had climbed to all of 1%. The face of South African poverty remains darker skinned. Apartheid helped create two countries in a single border, one of 8 million whites living in a country that has living standards remarkably similar to Canada's, the other of 38 million blacks and Indians who are citizens of a country with a standard of living that is more comparable to Namibia's. In its contract with international capital, South Africa's new black majority government has agreed to an economic program that does for the country's long-suffering black population precisely the opposite of what its white predecessors did for their own. This is fundamentally a nation in the midst of an identity crisis, torn between its communal African impulses and a Western value system that exalts the individual and his private gains. For proof, look no further than the country's efforts to privatize its state owned airline. I will stop here and continue with the next recording.